Good. Especially a little rain today helps everybody's attitude. Yeah.
We all set?
Yep, all set.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for August 22nd, 2022 back to order. We started tonight's meeting in executive session at 5:30. We are now going back into regular session. In executive session, we discussed collective bargaining for all town unions. In that discussion, we approved 3 MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, 2 for HEA, the Harwich Employees Association, and 1 for the Dispatchers Union. The Dispatchers Union was a contract settlement, so we have now settled 4 out of our 8 union contracts. With that, would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Public comment and announcement?
Hi, Carolyn Carey, Community Center Director, and I wanted to come before you to let you know about several new programs that are happening at the Community Center. I put a packet at your desk, but just for the general public. Tomorrow at the Community Center, we'll be doing a Bike Basic Fix-It Tips, and that's a free event, and we're using the new Fix-It stations that we got with the grant. So that is tomorrow, August 23rd at 5:30. And then on September 14th at 1 in the afternoon, we're doing learn all about the art of making a Nantucket lightship basket. So that's a free event as well. On Tuesday, September 20th, we're having pizza and candy bar bingo, another free event for all families.
I don't want to interrupt her, but that's what I'm interested in.
You're going to be the bingo caller. And then Touch a Truck on October 8th from 11 to 2. And then our boutique, where we give away free Halloween costumes, is coming up October 12, 13, and 14. And of course, our Halloween drive-through event scheduled for October 28th, as well as our Mad Science, Don't Try This at Home, on November 4th. In addition to that, we are starting a new series at the Community Center called Try It, You Might Like It. And each month, we're doing free classes. So in September, we're doing a fitness, and we will be having on September 6th at 6 p.m. so people who are working can get to experience some of the things that happen during the day. We have someone coming in to teach an exercise class. On September 13th at 6 p.m., we have someone coming in to teach NIA. And September 20th, someone coming in to teach Zumba. All of those are free, and the reason I gave you this long list is because I came before you last year and asked you for some money to do budgeting, to do programming. I just wanted you to know that I really appreciated it, and we're putting this forward so that you can see and the town can see it is money well spent. All of these are free and open to everyone, so thank you.
Thank you. Joe, real quick, will you announce the new go-to meeting link for tonight, or number?
Sure. There is a new go-to-meeting link. There was a faulty one earlier. Just a reminder, under the Division of Open Government, the board offers that as a convenience. The new number is 354-929-741. Again, if you're watching at home and you want to join in, it's 354-929-741.
Thank you, Joe. Ed?
Hi, Ed McManus with the Harwich Cranberry Festival. I'm just here to announce that after having missed 2 years, we're restarting Beach Day, which will be the Saturday after Labor Day. And we're scrambling to see how many events and activities we can pull together. We've sort of lost some because of the 2-year hiatus, but I think we'll have a pretty good day for the kids at the beach. We do have a food vendor showing up to provide food for the crowd, and a lot of the games that we've had in the past will be conducted. And then I note on your agenda, you have our application for a craft fair entertainment license and beer and wine license for the Cranberry Festival itself. It's essentially the same as we've done in past years. I've recruited some volunteer bartenders from the Seal, have volunteered their time along with my daughter and her boyfriend, who have been the standing-in bartenders for the last 3 years, so they'll be around. So we have a good group to handle that. Bob Weiser, I think, has come up with a nice lineup of music for the day, and I think at this point we have 150 craft vendors showing up, along with 14 booths representing different community groups in our town and neighboring towns. I'd stay for the hearing of it, but as it's summer, I have a house full of kids, of guests, and they're waiting for me to get home and fire up the barbecue for dinner. So anyway, if there's any questions, I assume it can be held over to another meeting before the event, but I think it's pretty standard as we've done in years past.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Take care.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Joe?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, you'll see in the packet, it's posted online, the town has been made aware through the Mass Department of Transportation's Highway Division that Harwich Elementary School has been seeking the Safe Routes to School program, and so it has progressed well enough that there is a virtual public informational meeting that is scheduled for Tuesday, September 13th, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. It is live, but it is all virtual. Additionally, folks should be made aware that the purpose of the informational meeting is to decide between two proposals on sidewalks. It indicates that the public meeting is to gauge the public's input and support for one of two alternatives that follow. The first is constructing 5-foot sidewalks, one along the west side of Sisson Road between Schoolhouse Drive and Main Street, the second one along the south side of Main Street between South Street and Sisson Road, and the third would go along the east side of South Street between Schoolhouse Drive and Main Street. And again, those would be 5-foot wide sidewalks. The other proposal is constructing 8-foot wide shared use paths for pedestrian and bicycle use, and again, along those same corridors. So that'll be the question that'll be brought up, and all are welcome to attend and participate. Again, that's Tuesday, September 13th, 7 p.m., and the dial-in instructions are in the board's packet.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement? With no objection from the board, I'm going to take 2 items out of order, starting in Old Business A and Old Business B. The first will be an update from the Finance Director, Town Accountant, and Treasurer Collector on disposition of land of low value. And the second is update from the Treasurer Collector on tax collection. Any objection from the board? Taking these out of order because we're having an audit downstairs, our annual audit, and we'd like to get the department head back down to the audit. So why don't we start with Anne Marie and Amy. You can join us at the table if you want, but land of low value first. Beef?
Good evening, Amy Bullock, Treasurer Collector. So last October, we got the affidavit approval for 16 parcels. They're all land of low value. They're all happen to be owners unknown. So we have 2 years to decide what to do with that. 4 of the parcels the water department has expressed interest in, so I would just probably, let the town take title to those. The others, we can decide whether or not we want to hold an auction. They're all landlocked. You had the maps in your packet so you could see where they were. I don't think anybody's going to have any interest aside from, in a butter. So.
Questions from the board? Larry?
Can you just explain to me a bit more what the process is now then, once we approve this?
So if we approve to have an auction, we need to advertise it. I did put the
You put some letters in there, but just.
Yeah, so, yeah, we'd have to advertise. I think it's a good idea to send notices to the abutter. I don't think that's required, but I think it would be a good idea. It's not that there's that many anyways, and some of those abutters are also owners unknown, so we wouldn't need to do those. And then I would suggest, because I've never, actually, we did have one years ago when I first started, a land of low value auction. I know Dolly Parkhurst, the former treasurer collector, did run that one, but I would hire an auctioneer.
And the timing?
I think they have to be advertised for at least 14 days,
I read
so,
that, but when will it start?
whenever.
That's
guys-
why we're here tonight,
Yeah.
Larry, to get moving on this
Okay,
before we run out of time.
that's it for me.
Don?
Not to surprise you, but I was an auctioneer for 20 years, and you do want to hire a professional one.
Right, yeah.
That's it. I mean, but I think it's a great idea to do.
Mary?
No, I thought it was a great proposal. We have no use other than the ones that Dan Pelletier wants. So let's see if we can get some money.
Julie?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Joe, anything to add?
Just that the IGR that's in the packet talks about recording. Is that something that has to take place before the auction or
That's
after?
been done. We've recorded the affidavit,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't include the recorded copy in the packet, but it has been done.
And to the board, is it, would it be your intent to go this route, public auction, rather than take them by eminent domain and retain them?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the recommendation.
Don? Mary?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
What do you need from us to go forward?
I don't think really anything. I'll just have to reach out to some, I have talked to one auctioneer in the past, and then we were just busy and our schedules just didn't coincide, but I can get back in touch with her. I don't know if that's something that we need to go out to bid for, or, you know, just get proposals. Yeah,
Got to be,
quotes, yeah,
okay. And you'll work with the town administrator on that.
sure.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, you're not talking about the value of the land. They only get a percentage of the overall auction proceeds. So when you're looking at what your requirements are under state procurement laws, don't look at the value of the total that they're selling. Look at the percentage. I mean, if they're standard, they're probably like 10% and a 10% buyer's fee, it's like a 20% premium.
Amy, we'd be looking for you to come back to us with quotes.
Okay.
And I know that the memo said that we should set a minimum on these properties.
Right,
So
right,
take a stab at that with
Yep.
with whomever, and then we'll meet again and formalize it.
sure.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone in the public?
Great job, Amy.
This will go a long way of cleaning up some more.
Yeah, some of them anyway, yeah.
Okay, Amy, next up is you. Update from treasurer collector on tax collections, and Anne Marie, if you have to go, you can go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So tax collections for FY '23 are right on track. We've got 49% of the the first two preliminary bills, so that's perfect. There were 13 redemptions for tax liens in FY '22, 4 so far this year. 23 parcels have petitions to foreclose filed right now. 2 of those had payment plans, but they're in default. And there are 16 remaining pay plans. 11 are in very good standing, and the others have been sent to the attorney for a nudge. Recorded 30 new takings in May. Those were the FY '21s. And then last month, 180 unpaid FY '22s that already were in tax lien were subsequented to those tax lien accounts. That leaves 216 unpaid FY '22 bills, and those will have letters going out shortly, as soon as we can grab the time to do that.
Thank you, Amy. Julie, questions or comments?
I don't know if you can recall off the top of your head, but wow, you've really cleaned up quite a bit of this, so just wondering what the number was.
We're staying on. I recorded those tax liens for the new takings in May, I think, this year, and that's the earliest they've ever been done. I couldn't even subsequent the '22s right away, because I had to wait for the demands to go out. So we're kind of moving things up,
Yeah.
time frame wise, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mary?
No questions, thanks, Amy.
Don? Larry?
I'm sure you're anxious as we are to see the light of day on this. Good
Yeah.
job moving it forward.
I don't think I'll be here that long, but yeah.
But you're moving.
Joe, anything to add?
Nope, thank you.
Joe, do we have anything from the surveyor that we hired to do the Judah Eldridge property? I notice now that that's up over 600,000 owed to the town, and I believe the town meeting article on that was only for about 400,000.
Nothing new to report at this time.
Okay. Amy, in that case, do we apply for land of low value on that? How do we get rid of the difference?
There's a limit to what the value can be. I think that is over that limit.
And 90% of that
Parcel.
is fees
Yeah,
and interest.
yeah. I'd have to look at the value on that property.
So Joe, we need to think that one through, because town meeting only appropriated a certain amount of money to move forward on that, and we're well beyond that now. So how do we move forward with that? Knowing that the title is an absolute mess and that nobody's been able to clear it.
Right.
How can DOR tell us to put away $600 and something thousand knowing no one's gonna come forward for
I
it?
know.
So I think we need to speak to somebody at DOR, once we get a value on that, to let them know that it's much less than what's owed. There has to be a mechanism, right?
One would hope.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amy.
You're welcome.
And then, Amy, just, would you announce where this is on the website? Because you have created
Oh, the
a-
tax lien yeah, so I'm updating that monthly. I did miss June because June was crazy. But, monthly, I put a new list up there. It's got details for the total owed for each property, and then it's got a summary. The summary breaks out just the tax lien amount, the actual taxes without the fees. Lists how many owners unknown, how many miscellaneous parcels, how many have been foreclosed on, that sort of thing.
Okay, just,
Oh, and it's on the treasurer's website.
Thank
It's
you.
treasurer's page, yeah.
Don, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick thing, everybody in this room knows, but when people start hearing figures like $600,000, and the chair alluded to this, and I know it went through town meeting, but people need to pay attention to it. There's a tax title process where we have to set aside a certain amount of money. Money's not changing hands. We just have to escrow it, and it has to stay there for a period of time until you can lift the tax title taking off the title. So if somebody comes forward, they have to satisfy
Right.
the demand.
Right.
So everybody needs to just calm down for a second, because it really isn't that kind of money. That's kind of accrued back taxes that have occurred.
Right, right.
When this came up before, when we started working on this, Amy, I think it was, or really working on it 4 or 5 years ago, it was contemplated selling the tax liens, and I know the board at the time was very against it. I'm still against it. But one thing that we did do was advertise it for the normal cast of people that don't pay their taxes until you file for collections. Is that something that we should be considering, advertising
The tax liens?
Yeah.
Aside from just having it on the website, I mean, we could. I mean, we got a lot of payment plans and a lot of payments out of that. A lot of heirs that just had no idea that they had, property that they maybe had inherited that was in tax lien, so.
And just to make it clear, the board's not trying to throw anyone out of their houses. A lot of these are vacant or land.
Most of them, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What are the board's thoughts on advertising the tax liens? Larry?
Anything that moves forward, I'm for.
Don?
I think we probably should just assure the public that we're exhausting every possibility.
I agree.
Julie?
I do too, yeah.
Just the list as is published, okay.
We work with the town administrator on that as well. Joe?
Well, let's discuss that a little bit, because this is a long list. I'm afraid everyone will ignore it, it's so large. You may want to prioritize and advertise some of the smaller.
We
and then-
could
and then do
take
a
like top
progressive
20
way
or something, most
so that
expensive.
People
or- yeah.
just don't, whatever the
Yeah.
priority is, but I'm afraid this won't get a lot of attention, it's too much.
I'd like to look at what we did last time, because it worked. So
I think last time we did everything.
I
yeah.
think we did.
Yeah.
The Chronicle, when you open it up, is a pretty good-sized piece of paper, so maybe what fits on the paper, but maybe we could just look at it, Amy, and see.
Yeah, I just want
Joe
to be
can
sure people
present it
don't
back to us.
discard it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Amy.
Sure thing.
Okay, back to joint meeting, next item, joint meeting with the Bylaw Charter Review Committee and Board of Selectmen. We have 6 topics on here, and the bottom topic is general Harwich Charter discussion. So if the Charter Bylaw Review Committee wants to join us, and wherever you want, the table here, you can pull extra chairs to this table. You can, Larry can scooch down if you want us
Stay
to.
with me.
I think this is fine.
If need, I'll move down.
You want me to sit over there?
Sure.
She's afraid of you, Larry.
Properly so.
Rightly so.
I'm good.
You sure don't sit here behind the microphone. Rough time you need. We won't hear you.
Microphone on the
You can, you can slide the microphone down when you need to.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much.
Okay, if you could start with introductions and then maybe call your
Call.
meeting to order.
We'll call the meeting to order, the August 22nd meeting of the Bylaw Charter Review Committee, meeting jointly with the Board of Selectmen. We have Carol Thayer, Vice Chair, Anita Doucette, Sandy Hall, Chairman. Our 4th member is Deb Sementa. She is stuck in traffic in Hingham. And as you will see in your agenda later on, we have, we know that Ray Gottwald has resigned. And I would just like to take this opportunity to publicly thank him for his time. He was a great member, and we will miss him, but we will be looking for a 5th member.
Great, thank you. So tonight we'll start with item A, which is special town meeting warrant article, charter review timelines with respect to the possible hiring of a consultant to assist the committee with a 5-year review of the charter and bylaws as required under Charter Provision 716(1). Joe, do you want to open this one?
Sure. The board members should have in front of them, and there's copies in front of the bylaw charter review members. The excerpts from the charter that you've referenced first, Chapter 7, Appointed Town Agencies, Section 16, highlights the bylaw charter review committee. And as you've indicated, Mr. Chairman, in the middle of that charge and description, it says the committee shall regularly review the bylaws of the town and submit proposed revisions to the town meeting at least once every 5 years. Additionally, the committee shall, and I put these words in air quotes, regularly review the charter and submit proposed amendments. So the charter speaks specifically to a 5-year review on bylaws and then a regular review of charter.
Thank you, Joe.
I guess for us, the question is, we're very much in favor of hiring a consultant. I think that would be extraordinarily helpful, even just to update us on what possible changes there are potentially for us to look at. We really haven't revisited the home rule legislation in some time. I guess the questions that we would have would be what your timeline is for hiring a consultant, where you would draw from, and what you think is a reasonable timeline to complete the study. I know there was some discussion about it being ready for a May town meeting. I think that is extraordinarily optimistic. I don't think it can be done in that time.
Thank you. Joe? I mean, it has to pass town meeting for the money. So fall town
Well, you
meeting.
have your September town meeting for
Right.
the funding, but I'm
Right.
saying that there was, I believe there was some discussion of having these recommendations in this review ready for the May town meeting.
Joe, what are your thoughts on that? Given
So-
that we get approval at fall town meeting for the money.
Well, several thoughts. First, what you're talking about under your joint meeting, to me, is the standard process that's intended to go forward. What I've been talking about in my various presentations to the Bylaw Charter Review Committee and in talking with the board, there may be more pressing items that come up sooner, and that's the deliverable for the May 2023 town meeting. So on the one hand, the consultant would be to assist in the 5-year review of bylaws. It's interesting to note that it doesn't distinguish between general or zoning, because we know the zoning bylaws require, I think, a thorough going over as well. Additionally, when I presented the draft article to the Finance Committee, they had opined about, does the town want to, whether it's in addition to or separate from the consultancy, establish some sort of charter review or charter revision committee. where it's beyond just the members of the bylaw charter review and beyond the board. And so I said I would present that at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Sandy?
So they're talking about an additional committee to review the charter?
Generally speaking, I would say yes. I think that's what they're talking about. If the town is looking to do a more comprehensive revisit of the charter, they entertain the concept of a charter committee.
Well, the charter specifies the bylaw charter review committee would be doing a 5-year review, so that is within the four corners of our job. So putting another committee on top of it does not seem to be efficient or even possible under our charter.
Yeah.
Mary?
I was gonna ask that same question. I don't understand why we'd want another committee. That sounds like that's what this committee is supposed to do.
Exactly.
What's the logic for?
So I want to tread
Balancing checks.
lightly. I'm offering information that I was made aware of at the FinCom meeting. I wouldn't want the board to think, or the bylaw committee to think that I'm advocating. Rather, I'm passing on comments from the Finance Committee. If memory serves correctly, I think what they were talking about is if the town's going to do a deep dive into the charter, these are my words, not necessarily theirs, then the town may want to consider broadening the folks that are involved in that process. However, I want to emphasize this is not my proposal, and rather something that came up as the Finance Committee was first analyzing the draft article for September.
Thank you, Joe. Julie?
So I can understand both questions. I understand what the charge of the committee is, and so I get what you're saying. But I can also understand where, when you're exposed to these bylaws frequently in various levels, whether it be the zoning bylaws or other bylaws, maybe the idea is there that a fresh look or a different perspective looking at those bylaws. I'm not sure. This is the first I've heard of it, so. But I can sort of see that point because, some of these things probably aren't thought about until they're implemented or you're dealing with those bylaws. So I wouldn't be adverse to it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Julie. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go off of what Julie was saying. There's two different things going on here. There was a deep dive in the charter. It was done in 2006 through 8 when Winnie Alvaska did that, and it went to the general court ultimately. It reanalyzed everything. And it took quite a while. I think it was like a year and a half, something like that. I mean,
No idea how long. I wasn't paying attention.
I think I was chair through one period of that. It took literally forever. Everybody was called in for their own sections and everything. That is a wholly separate thought from the bylaws, which, as Joe suggested, I mean, I served on the planning board in the 90s. I don't know that anybody's done a deep dive at looking at how coherent the evolution of all these bylaws were and whether they're all consistent numerically with references to each other. I mean, that's a big endeavor. I mean, and I don't know that. When I was chair of the Charter Bylaw Committee, we didn't do that then either. I mean, because it was hard enough to be able to look at the new recommendations and see if they overlaid properly with the numeric system without seeing the whole thing. So I could understand why we especially want to hire somebody too and go through all of that. But there's only 2 levels of charter review that I know of, and one is the charter committee that's in the charter, and the other one would be if we wanted to do something really massive, but it requires a massive effort because it would be an elected commission that would have to go, it would have to go to a ballot, and then it would have to sit and come up with recommendations, and then we go to town meeting. We're talking about something that's years then. I think they could accomplish that if they just had people broken off into the various sections of the charter. This is your section. What's wrong with it, or in terms of how you're currently operating, or how can we align that? But I think you do want people who are familiar with the charter to do that deep dive, because otherwise it becomes incomprehensible.
Julie?
So to that point, I think, I hear you. There's one massive kind of overview, and this is the first I'm really hearing of this, so I'm thinking what finance may be saying is more to your second point, which is analyzing piece by piece, department by department kind of thing, to make sure that what we have is making sense or not, duplicative or adverse.
And you're required to every 5 years. I mean, it says so.
Larry?
Thank you. Don gave a good explanation. I'm in favor of the consultant, because there's a lot of work to do for the committee. I would like to see it stay within the committee. I think my preference would be to be sure your committee invites public input, advertise it, and it pays a lot of attention to the public input from all sources. And if you do that, we're not gonna make that by next town meeting. It's gotta be a year after that, maybe. But I think you can do that with a consultant and proper, advertisement and public input. You can do a lot of deep dive that Don and Julie have mentioned, without creating another committee. That does scare me a little bit, because you could, the charters work pretty well. It's not perfect, nothing ever is. Always could be improved. But I don't know if we want to start from scratch at this point either.
Thank you, Larry. Mary? And then back to Sandy.
And maybe we ask FinCom what their concerns were and give those concerns to this committee, so they could take a look at that.
Sandy?
What I see is that when we did the charter originally, we had a 9-member elected commission, we had a consultant. To do that job, they gave you either 12 or 18 months, according to law. We did it in 12, but that meant that we met every single week, sometimes several times a week, sometimes subcommittees being sent out to talk to some of the smaller boards, and then we would bring some of the larger boards in. We've already had a discussion with the Finance Committee some months ago. The consultant would be really helpful with that and just guiding that process. And I mean, we were so dedicated. We met at Brooks Academy, and Dr. David Booth drove down from Amherst every single week in snow and what have you. We had 3 meetings by candlelight when the power went out. It's true. So I would envision just modeling this review essentially that way. Our only focus at that point was the charter. We didn't deal with the bylaws at all. The bylaws were reviewed later for consistency with the charter. So I see it as more of a 2-step process. And as far as the zoning bylaws, my personal opinion, and I don't think we've had this discussion quite, is that may be something you want to hand over to the planning board to have a review, because that is completely outside of our ken. I mean, I look at the zoning bylaws and my eyes glaze over.
Yes, I know. I know.
Sandy, if you want to call on your members if they have anything, and then I'll come back.
Carol, did you have anything?
No, I think this whole conversation originally started when we talked with the Finance Committee at our first reorganization meeting this year about the timeline for Joe and for town meeting and all of that. And one thing led to another into, maybe taking a look at the charter and the dates in the charter and revising the dates of the charter in order to make the lead up to town meeting a little more streamlined, a little more, just tighten that up a little bit.
Less
Joe was a
crunched.
great help with that. He put together a proposal for tightening up those deadlines, and we reviewed it with him. We thought they were good. He was going to obviously review it with you. But that's how it all began. It started with the Finance Committee in reviewing the dates, to bring this all together in a more timely fashion, along with, the capital plan and the fiasco that turned out to be this year. So we want to try to tighten up those deadlines and bring these things, into clearer focus. And I think that was mainly how this all started. Then as we started looking at it, we're talking about bylaws and so forth, it started to get a little out of control. But I think what we want to review the charter. We want to review, our bylaws, not necessarily the zoning bylaws. We want to review the personnel bylaw. That hasn't had a look at in a long time, and that's something that we have talked about last year, and we talked more about it this year. So those are the areas that we're primarily focusing on.
Anita?
I don't really have anything to say.
Thank you. So I think we're in agreement that we're going to do a comprehensive look and then also look at some potential charter changes for a annual town meeting. So you'll support the idea of a comprehensive review.
100%.
Okay. And then may I ask why you haven't done a comprehensive review in the last 5 years?
Well, we didn't have a committee for several years. We've been back together as a group for, what, a year, a little over a year now? So we've been just
A year, maybe.
trying to focus thoughts on the immediate things, and this has come up now as something that we need to do.
Okay, but the last comprehensive review was done 2006 to 2008?
That was the last thing that resulted in a general court action. But
Okay.
if I might,
Go ahead.
I'll lay on the sword here. I was the chair of the committee. When it got resuscitated, it was actually dormant for years, and I think it probably was 5 years. When I came back in, it took about a year to reformulate it, and I think that was 2015, I want to say. And at that point in time, Angela Lamontia was mostly focused as our liaison on water, wastewater. I mean, pretty much every discussion we had was relative to that. We did do a deep dive into what a liaison meant because people were straying off onto becoming quasi-members of committees and such. And we tried to look at other things. As a matter of fact, we took out the recommendation of the town council, the terms in the charter, and referred them into the bylaws to, so that we could make the numbers and the terms more efficiently revised if we needed to. So there was kind of a deep dive, but then there was another year when there wasn't a committee again. So it's kind of appropriate, it is appropriate now to have that discussion because we really do want to have that.
Okay. Mary?
I just didn't hear your answer, Sandy. Did I hear you say that, yes, we could have some things like the dates that Joe's put together to tighten up town meeting? We could do that for next May?
Certainly do that, and one of the things I did do as an exercise for the committee, and I'll share this if you want to, is the 1987 charter had a different set of deadlines than what you're looking now. They were changed, I assume, during maybe the Ovaska time period. I don't know why they were changed. I don't know what was behind it. I wasn't involved at that point. But it seems in watching the whole process over the last couple of years, everything has just gotten smushed up to the end. All I can tell you is that I know that when originally, the first many years that I was involved with this, it worked. Our timelines worked. So what I did was I took a grid and said, what would the timelines look like now if we went back to the original plan? So it isn't something we have to get into in any deep way, but just something for you folks to maybe take a look at, think about, and just see how it could work.
Sandy, how close is that to what Joe presented to you guys?
I haven't had a chance to really
Okay.
figure that out. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. It's probably pretty close.
Because I know the board was
Wanting to stretch it out.
happy with this year's
Right.
look at what the dates
Yeah,
were.
I have a copy of that, and we just really haven't, and it's summer. Guess what?
I've seen this.
Everybody's crazy in the summertime.
All right, so Sandy, A and B I think we've covered. So B was next step for charter review article. First step is getting it to pass fall town meeting for the funding for it. And then procurement to get a company to come in and actually do it. And then I think once we meet with that company, we can get a much better idea on timeline. Certainly, it's not gonna be a Maytown meeting.
We got our consultant years ago through the Mass Municipal Association, because they have a list of, I assume still, as they have, of people who are qualified to advise on specifically home rule, charter procedures and what have you. And Dr. Booth sadly has since passed away. He was amazing. But I'm sure they have a lot of good people there now who could help.
We comfortable that we're okay with A and B now?
Yes.
I think we sort of covered C.
I think we did too.
Are we going to be looking for a consultant?
I think that's something that goes through, requests for proposals or what have you. I'd like to be involved in that process and certainly in the vetting process. I hope you would have.
I
It's
have,
not specifically something that we would.
I have no problem with that. Mary, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Joe, yeah, you don't have any problem with charter bylaw being involved in the procurement process?
No, it would help frame out the scope of services. Given the dollar amount that's anticipated, if it is greater than 50,000, we have to do a request for proposals. If we think it's gonna be valued less, we can do 3 quotations. But regardless, we need a solid scope of services to build off of.
Right.
Sounds like a plan. We can meet together sometime next month, maybe, to work on that.
Say again?
You can meet with us maybe next month to work on that, or,
Quite possible. Later on tonight, the board's gonna find out when special town meeting is really gonna be.
We really don't need it until after we get the funding from town meeting, but working on it sooner rather than later makes more sense.
we would need easily a full year to do this properly, if you want it done right.
No, I mean the procurement for the
Oh, okay.
consultant.
Yeah.
Just the project itself.
Right,
You know, you want it
But if
done
we're
right,
talking
not
about-
necessarily fast.
right.
Talking about an article for the funding of a
Well,
consultant.
that's in there.
Okay,
That's already in
Alright.
the warrant. I
okay.
Okay,
understand.
on to C, discussion on potentially amending the Harwich zoning and general bylaws. I think we've touched on general bylaws.
General.
Zoning, I couldn't agree with you more, that should start with planning. Comments from the board on that, Julie?
So on that, I mean, we're in a situation where we don't currently have a planner. And we also need time, because there's probably some things we would like to see if we could get done, you know, from next year's town meeting, but that also requires public hearings and stuff, so I don't know how quickly we can, I mean, I would like to see us realistically be able to attack some of those things that need changing, but at the same token, we want to incorporate it with planning, so I guess it depends on when we get a planner.
Mary?
Yeah, I agree, separate them, keep general with you and zoning with planning.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, John Idman spent weeks and weeks just sitting and reading all of the bylaws and code relative to that. And I might point out to you that that's not the same as a deep dive, because you'd need this. We were talking earlier about the kinds of software that would align with where things go relative to personnel. Same deal here. I mean, I recall vividly in the late 90s and early 2000s, we had different copies, and this is relevant, we had different copies of Microsoft Word, and they didn't hold formatting with each other. So when it started referring to other sections of the zoning bylaws, all of a sudden the numbering wasn't aligning properly. You'd need somebody to actually just go through this electronically too, make sure that when you refer to things that they are the proper references. So it's not just what it says, but what else it points you to. It's a mammoth task, and like I said, John took I want to say weeks, but it's probably months just sitting reading.
Larry?
It's hard to add what Don said, because it was too confusing for the town planner to get through it all. We have an issue. But I agree, separate the zoning out. And the consultant, I would have him work, but have him come back at the end to be sure that everything does tie together that Don mentions to, so that charter flows through the bylaws, flows through the zoning, and that it's straightforward. And that's,
The charter really
Yeah.
doesn't have anything much to do with zoning.
no, I agree with that,
Yeah.
but they're in the same document, so they should be able to read from one to the other,
You know, the appendix ought to refer to it, you know.
so that it's understandable. That's my only point.
Right, yeah, I agree with that.
Sandy?
Where are we?
Still on C, just your thoughts on what the board said about referring this to planning first?
I think on the zoning, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's just a whole different world that
Mhm.
we're not prepared to get into.
You're all in
Yeah.
agreement?
Yeah.
Okay. And I do know that John Ivan, before he left, laid some changes out, potential changes, and a lot of thoughts and ideas to Megan on his departure. So we do have a little bit of a blueprint from our last planner, and
Good.
I believe we're getting closer on a new planner, so more on that later.
Okay.
Joe, anything to add on that? Nope. Good. All right, clarification of section 4-5-2 of the charter with respects to additions to staff. Joe, do you want to start this one?
Very limitedly, that is to say that you have in front of you the full text of the section that relates to that. To me, it's a matter of interpretation and debate, and I would defer to Board of Selectmen, Bylaw Charter Review, and others for that debate.
Um,
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, both the board members and the committee members have the excerpt in front of them on that single pager.
And Joe, we did obtain a legal opinion on this,
I just want to look at it. You did.
Correct.
and do we have that in the packet?
We do.
And basically, the legal opinion states that the hiring is the town administrator's purview, and the funding is town meeting purview. The town meeting's purview is not on the positions themselves.
Correct.
Which is, that was-
Anything, I guess I'll start with charter bylaw on that.
Well, the question really is a question of transparency as much as anything. And there was a lot of discussion on this board last spring about whether to include the funding for new positions in the budget or whether to put them in an article. And I believe you ultimately decided to put them in the budget. The original intent of the charter in the passage that we're talking about was that they be included in an article, although it does not say so. However, we all knew that was the intent, and that is how it operated for many, many years. And again, I have a grid here going back to '93, which was the first time this actually came up as a town meeting issue, as to how it was funded, why it was, which was in an article, and there were many, many, many positions. And this practice basically continued right up through Jim Merriam and seemed to end with Jim Merriam. So while the charter language you can interpret any way you want to, the positions are established by the Board of Selectmen, but only subject to the funding by town meeting. So it was the feeling and desire of the original framers to have it as transparent as possible, because the average person is not going to drill down into the budget to see how many new employees the town is looking to have in any given year. So I would personally like to see, and we have discussed this, we would like to see that language expanded to stipulate that it should be in a warrant, in the interest of being fully open to the discussion by the taxpayers, because there are very few people who are going to stand on town meeting and drill into a line item in a budget. And then the following year, it would be in a budget, and that's how it operated. There was one year, I recall, Mr. Powers said at one point that the only time that it happened in a warrant article was in an override. That is actually factually incorrect. It was in an override one year, I believe it was 97, and all of those positions that failed on override in 97 were in an article that was funded through available funds in 98. But I will give you what I gave Joe last April. I don't know if you've seen it or not, so I brought some copies just in case you didn't.
I have not. And Sandy, when you say "we all knew," you know, the interpretation piece to me is,
We, on the Board of Selectmen.
wait till you get back there, because the camera's gotta be on you and the microphone
Thank
needs to
you.
be talked into. But
follow those wires.
I take exception to the lack of transparency, as both of those positions were talked about, and I can't tell you how many meetings we talked about it and challenged in this room where the debates are supposed to happen, and prior to going to town meeting. And it is the town administrator that we hire, and the Board of Selectmen that we go through these meetings every week that have these conversations, and then town meeting funds them. And if they don't fund them, anybody on town meeting floor can make an amendment. But to say that it's not transparent, I don't know how many more transparent that we can be, given the amount of articles that were written on it and the amount of debates that had on it. And to me, interpretation and past practice, they're both very interesting, but the way that the framers of the charter wrote the charter, it's crystal clear. Town administrator does the hiring and the firing, and town meeting funds it, the hiring. So I personally don't see any reason for a change whatsoever, and wouldn't support a change. Julie?
I feel similarly, because I also think that we're empowering the town.
Julie, you're gonna have to speak into the microphone.
Oh, am I not?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Use your outside
I
voice.
guess I'm
Yeah, outside voice.
doing my backing away. I do feel similarly in the sense that the town administrator is supposed to run the town. And the way that I interpret this is that it's not a requirement, other than the funding. And so although I appreciate the level of transparency, the one problem I have is back to the chair's point, we talk about these things at length, that you can either be here in person, you can log on, listen to all of these discussions, read the papers. What I think happens sometimes in some of these situations, not all, but some, is it becomes a political football at town meeting. And unfortunately, not enough people show up to town meeting. And then I feel that debate becomes a much smaller debate. And rather than having everybody debate it, if everybody has the availability to come in front of the board and talk about it, and we're talking about it excessively, then I don't know that any part of that is like covert operations. So I think that if you're going to have an administrator to run the town, and he's empowered to hire and fire, then that's how we should go about it.
Thank you. Mary?
I can argue either side of this. My problem in life is there's this much gray and there's a little bit of black and a little bit of white. So I can see both sides of it. In the one hand, I think we've got a good process with Joe and Megan, and I trust them in that hiring the best person is in their best interest. And if Joe in particular, who's our direct report, if he hires someone that doesn't work out, that's a negative on him. So there's no advantage to not.
And this
On
is,
the-
we're really, right now, Mary, we're talking about new hires. So, cultural center director.
Yep.
And the housing advocate. That's kind
Okay.
of, that's what this came,
But
that's how this
same-
came forward.
But same thing. It's only to his advantage to hire the best. But I also can see, I think Larry talked about it at one of our meetings, that, he'd like to see the top 3 or the top 4 candidates or whatever, to see that, we really did pick the best. So I didn't know where to go with this. So I talked to 4 or 5 selectmen in different towns that have town administrators and talked about their processes. And only one of them has a 3-person review. And I said, well, what about the whole confidentiality thing? Oh, we don't care about that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're confusing two topics. So we're strictly only talking about town meetings approval for new hires, new positions.
Oh,
Not
okay.
new hires of a vacant position, but as we created those 2 new positions
Okay.
this year.
All right, I'm on the
Sanders
wrong topic.
basically saying that it should go in past practice, that it went before town meeting and they approved the position. What we as a board decided this year was, through a lot of conversation, that we were creating those 2 new positions and that they were in the budget and they could be challenged in the budget. But based on our priorities and the town administrator's recommendation, we put them into the budget and not a separate article. So the conversation now is separate article for new positions or not. Sandra's saying basically that the past practice up until Jim Merriam, which was 2 town administrators ago?
Up until Christopher Clark, through
Okay.
Jim Merriam.
Right, so up until about 8 years ago, roughly, that new positions were in separate articles at town meeting, and then when Chris Clark started, that went away.
Okay.
So the conversation what we're having now is whether we support our decision on new hires not being articles, but being part of the operating budget based on our priorities and the town administrator's recommendation.
On that, I think we argued that pretty long and hard at a couple of meetings and came to the conclusion that anybody that didn't know we were adding 2 new positions was under a rock somewhere. And just to keep the number of warrant articles down and manageable, it went in the budget, and I still agree with that.
Thank you, Mary. Don?
Since we're relitigating, I respectfully disagree. I mean, starting with legal counsel, this is ad nauseum. I've been feeling this way, and I would just say it once more, I'd get rid of these guys and get a whole other representation. Been saying that for years. They keep representing legally minimalistic arguments for something that may have ethical implications. And I get that they can argue these things, but I'm not looking for getting away with the least possible explanation. I lived here for 25 years. and there was always an article. Let's separate the two things, first of all. The funding mechanism doesn't necessarily mean an article led to an override, because the article could be in a town meeting, and it could be approved from available funds from taxes. The reason it was done, because it was slid into the budget in the following year, was to highlight it so that the townspeople didn't get the feeling that there was government bloat. And I hear you, Julie, but so, as far as I'm concerned, 300's better than 5. I mean, we can hold as many meetings as we want to, but the town meeting is a legislative body that gets to do these things. We never had a real problem. If there was I can't recall how many of these things went down permanently, because it was just a venue to sector out. You all know this. It takes about 8 minutes to pass $40 million for the municipal budget. Nobody's going to make an amendment because it's daunting. They're not going to pull out somebody. When you get a new position that the government has not been doing before, this was a way of highlighting it so that there could be a discussion, the townspeople were behind it, and you could move forward. It's certainly not a criticism of the town administrator, because we did all support this. Despite the fact that I wanted an article, I supported the addition of the employees. I just feel like, from where I came, and I've said this before, probably before Mary was here, I was born in Yonkers, New York, whose slogan was, "Who let that happen?" Nothing happened there in a transparent way. Even though you could conceivably go to a town council meeting and everything, it was refreshing to go here and know that you had a town meeting and you could thrash out things in front of your neighbors. And I view past practice in the same way as I view policy. There's a weight to that. If you went to court, there would be a weight to your discussion if you've always done something one way and now you want to do it something a different way. It's not malicious in any way. It's just like, if the townspeople supported it and we supported it with our recommendations, I expect fully that it'll pass. I just feel like there is no way to expect that people are going to make an amendment on the budget. There just isn't.
Larry?
Yeah, we're sort of re-arguing what we discussed before, and I disagreed with the chair before on this, and so I felt at that time and feel that it's important to have this. I hate to use the word transparent, because I agree this is transparent, but as pinpointed that this is an important issue for the town when we hire a new employee. It changes sometimes how we operate. It's not just 1 year funding, but it's year after year funding. And we, some years past, we had agreed to do this because we wanted to be sure that the town was comfortable with how many people we hire. Because people could criticize us for hiring too many, and it should be visible and discussed. I agree within the budget, but that's not the same as bringing it up and having people look at it and say, oh yeah, we agree with that. We're going to pay for it this year, we're going to pay for it for the next however many years. So I like it when it was in the town a warrant article, and still do. I think it serves a purpose.
Thank you, Larry. Julie?
And so, to be clear, I appreciate, and I think you're right to clarify that there is lots of transparency. We talked ad nauseum about this over the last year. And I would just say, though, in the same token that we want people to be engaged at town meeting, and I do, and I would love 500 people, 1,000 people, whatever, right? But at the same token that we're talking about, that's not what we get, but we're here every Monday almost, except for the summer. And we're talking about these things constantly. And our agenda packets are public information. So I don't disagree with you that it's nice to have more and more information, but I would say that the problem becomes that here we have some topic or a position that we're talking about, and here we're talking about a position. And we're saying the people deserve the information. I do not disagree with you. But the information they deserve is available year-round. And so, if you don't like the idea that we're adding a position, please feel free to come and talk about it when it's on the agenda item. If you want to bring it up at public comment so we can tell you when to talk about it. I don't want the public to think that we're trying to slide positions through and not be informative, because that's the last reason I've ever been involved in any kind of governmental position. But it is important to remember that sometimes what happens is something becomes something, a position that a certain group doesn't like. They don't want it. And if they happen to be the people that show up or gather the troops, and this happens in every single element of our government. It's not just a position, it can be a certain budget item. So I just want to be clear that if we're going to do that, then I would say we go to an extreme then. We're going to have to make sure it's clear to everybody, every single thing that's new. And so welcome to that town meeting, that'll be 4 nights.
I don't want to debate this very long. My only point would be,
Thank you.
I don't want to, obviously that extreme would be silly, not to go too far with it. The issue I have though is, when it's in the budget, even if it prevents a reasonable discussion at town meeting, because people don't know how to debate a single budget item. We present the budget, and it's very rare that someone will point out and, well, I don't like that budget line because it's too much going on. And so in some ways it prevents, or at least it makes it more difficult to have a debate on the item. And I think the adding employees is a more important item than adding, new fire trucks, for instance, which may be more money, but it's a one-shot deal. And I'm not going to
Thank you.
have
Sandy?
anything to say.
Obviously, we're not gonna solve this one tonight.
You're not gonna solve this one tonight,
No.
but let me
But it's good to
let me
debate
just
it.
say this, human nature being what it is, you meet every Monday night, you have your meetings on YouTube, we all do that. People don't sit home and watch these things. People don't necessarily read the newspaper. They don't know how much you've discussed it. They don't know why you're doing it. So they come to town meeting looking for, okay, what do you want and why? And in this particular instance, when you are expanding your employee base, there's a lot of money surrounding every single job you add. And that has an impact on everybody. They won't look for it in the budget. They're flat out going to be intimidated about going into the budget. There are very few people who ever even get up and speak on town meeting floor, much less challenge the budget. Going back over the years when it was treated as a separate article, there was very rarely any problem with that. There was one year it was subject to override because it had to be. That was the only time it failed. The following year, all of those positions went through, and I don't think there was an instance that I found that those articles failed or even generated a huge amount of debate. But just as the elected officials' salaries are always up there, the new hired, the expansion, more people, while we, certainly desperately need more people in certain places. Town meeting at least should have it in front of them that these are the people we're talking about. I don't think you're gonna get huge groups of people coming in to challenge the Council on Aging Assistant Director. Our Assistant Town Administrator position came to us through an article on town meeting floor. So I think it's not to say that you all aren't transparent and you all haven't debated it thoroughly and put it on your agenda and put it on YouTube. It's just that not a lot of people follow this all that closely, and you know that.
I couldn't agree, sorry.
Anyone else on your committee before I go back to the board? And I know I have one member of the public, at least one that wishes to speak. Anyone else on the board?
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add, back, the funding, of the article position and the funding of the article was back during my tenure as Finance Committee. And we went at it as an article with funding to be determined, whether it was through available cash or through override if necessary. Primarily, the year it came up on override was for 8 new firefighters. That's a lot of money. And it's going to increase, the driving force behind all that is Prop 2.5. If you're going to go up 2.5% every year, and you can't do it if you're gonna add new people and the cost of the associated costs of new people. The only way to do that is through the article. Bring it forward that way, and bring it forward as over 2.5. And that's how it came about, that it was funded mainly to stay within the confines of Prop 2.5. And I think that's still a valid argument. I mean, we still have Prop 2.5. And if you're going to go up, take this year's base budget and go up 2.5%, it's kind of hard to add new people into that and the associated overhead costs to go with that, which was the reason for overhead language. It wasn't always necessary to do it by overhead. If we kept it certified in free cash, we were able to do it that way. Not always possible.
The only thing that I would add is, years ago when the charter was put together, the meetings for the Board of Selectmen were not aired. They were not on television. So a lot of the general public did not realize that a new position was going to be going on to the town meeting. So therefore, an article would go forward. It just makes it, I don't like the word transparent, but at least it kind of notifies the public, because not every person, like was mentioned, not everybody watches your meetings every week. But it would be something to just notify the public, hey, yes, we are going to put a position forward. We have a new position coming up. Very seldom do they ever get turned down, but just to let the public know. That would be my only thought.
While the person gets up to speak, I would just say a few final things. Sandra, I'm not sure if you want to bring this back to us or if you want us to bring it back to you with a vote on how we want to proceed. But either way, I guess we could bring it back so that we could tell you where we are as a group, and then you can bring it back as how you are as a group. I would tell you that I completely disagree with the amendment piece on town meeting floor. As I've watched for years, people get up and make amendments. This year, we had a very specific group of revitalization of the Harwich Taxpayers Association, all who are very capable of making amendments. And I would point to not only the Board of Selectmen meetings, but I'd point to the last 15 years we've all screamed about housing. And it's a priority of the entire town. Every housing committee, the formation of our housing trust, but everybody that came and presented to us and everybody that has spoken about housing for all the years, that whole group of people initiated that position. And that's what we brought to town meeting. And I would argue that there was a lot more people that have been screaming for housing than the 250 people that go to town meeting. And sometimes the critics on something are the only ones that go to town meeting. And I would ask and argue that we have to listen to everybody. And that's how it got to where it got to. 204 Sisson Road was presented by the town administrator as a building that the town owns and that many, many, many people want to keep, that we didn't have anyone to run it. And again, we had some very seasoned town meeting people, one of whom's about to speak, question this at several meetings and bring this up at several meetings and town meeting. So there's no question in my mind about transparency. And lastly, if any board member wants to bring up changing town council, do so. But KP Law has done a great job for this town, and it was a very simple legal opinion based on a piece of our charter that by one of the authors of the charter says was vague. So it was a very simple legal opinion, and how we can challenge that, I don't know. But John Giorgio is a great attorney, and he's served this town well. And lastly, I know I said that before, past practice. If we're gonna talk about past practice as our practice, we really need to take a step back and look at the tax nightmare this town is in and the owner's unknown nightmare this town is, and analyze how much past practice we actually want to follow rather than clarifying and doing things correctly. Noreen?
Thank you. Good evening, board, committee, and town administrator. I appreciate all your comments. I want to talk about the process of hiring new people.
Noreen,
Nothing.
will you just state your name for the record again, your whole name?
Noreen Donahue, Headwaters, speaking on my own behalf.
Thank you. Mary was pushing me under the table.
Okay, so I think that was planned to throw me off.
Maybe.
So, All right, first of all, I really do appreciate all sides of this. We're only talking about a process here. We're not talking about a position. We're not talking about a department. We're talking about how we do it. There shouldn't be any anger. We're talking about a procedure. First of all, to the point of whether if you talk about things at Board of Selectmen's meetings 47 times, if that then makes it sufficient to not highlight it at a town meeting. I'd like to address that for 1 second. I used to feel that way. I used to feel the same way some of the selectmen have said that, people should be, informed and everything else. I felt that way, excuse me, I get breathless, up until I heard people talking at the Route 124 issue, for those of you who remember that. And at that time, a gentleman got up at the Board of Selectmen's meeting and said, "You can't punish me for not reading the paper. You can't punish me for not going to Board of Selectmen's meetings." And prior to that, I felt we could. I was even, at one point, in Bill's paper, I was called an uninformed newcomer. That was a common phrase at the time. And I took great offense at it, and I've been here since then, just to make sure that never happened again. But I truly do feel if people choose not to come to your meetings, if they choose not to look at your agenda, if they choose not to read his paper, we cannot punish them. We still owe them the obligation of presenting all the pertinent material at town meeting. That's my feeling on that. As far as this word about transparency, I look at it as in terms of transparency, in terms of tracking the jobs. I tried to track from a report from Carol Coppola. From 2013 to 16, we made 11 new positions. If you don't have a method to track the jobs in your organization, if they're all smushed into the budget, good luck to you. It's hard enough to do it anyway. You really need something separate to look at your organization so you don't wind up saying, "Oh my God, we're at 90% salaries, we can't afford this." And that's what I mean by the tracking in a separate article. It's a process. Some year, there'll probably be a group there that yells and screams about the position. Another year, it'll sail right through, just like the housing one. You can't not like the process because you didn't like a group who was opposed to something, on one year, whereas another year, they were all for it. It just doesn't make sense to me. Also, I've heard said a couple of times that if it's in a separate article, you're approving the position and not not just the funding. That doesn't make sense to me. When you have an article, you're approving what's in the article and the funding. You can't separate it and say, then you're taking his rights away and just approving the position. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I'm having a little trouble, so I'll speed up. I was really glad to see the legal opinion because it clearly says that in 452 that it can be done either way, which is how we've been doing it all along anyway. So actually, the opine has not changed. What I'm asking, and have been all along, is that we decide how we want to do it. What is best for us now in 2022? And then we make the charter agree with that. I can't imagine overrides in this contentious environment we're in now. But I really feel we have an obligation to have an article for every full-time and part-time job. Most of them sail through in 3 minutes, and what can be more important to discuss than adding something to our budget, which is going to be there in perpetuity? Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Noreen. Joe, anything to add?
Possibly, but I think you have someone on remote that wants to weigh in.
Anyone online wish to weigh in?
Hi, it's Elizabeth Harder.
Good evening.
I just want to remind you people of a few months ago, there were a few problems. And the main problem was exactly what the last speaker said. It's about new positions, because once you create a new position, you have that person forever with OPEB, with benefits, etc. So I do think that when new positions are being created, it's just best to have a separate item in the town meeting warrant so that people are aware that new positions are being created. Because as she said, trying to keep track of them is impossible for a layman. And if we'd had the ability to, if you don't give the town the ability at town meeting to speak up about it, they don't have an opportunity. Whether or not they go to every single one of your board meetings, that doesn't give them the opportunity to say, no, we don't want this. They can voice their displeasure, but they have no actual say in whether or not they want to make all these new hires. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else online? Anyone else in the audience? Joe? Anything?
Sure, and I'll try to be brief and simple. For me, as the town administrator, and this section falls under the chapter that is called the town administrator, I'm always looking for opportunities to understand the community's viewpoint. I washed ashore here 7 years ago, very grateful that I did. But I say that because I had very little, if anything, to do with the development of this charter, and had a brief period of time where I was on the committee before you this evening and could offer my input on interpretation. But as the town administrator, I do not think that interpretation should be left to the administrator. So when I look at the chapter that's dedicated to the role that I possess, and I see the section that talks about administrative reorganization, under which this falls, and I see the particular clause in question, to me, it is a string of very easy to understand words, so it's left to interpretation. To me, there are words missing from 452 that could have been added when the charter was adopted, or could have been added when the charter has been amended on several occasions. And that would be to include after the words town meeting by a warrant article. So the absence of that tells me, as someone who is steeped in municipal government, but not as familiar with the town particularly, we know that the warrant is the creation of the Board of Selectmen, separate from the petition process, of course, but it is understood under the charter and under the statutes that the board creates the warrant. And so the absence of that language leads me to continue to believe that unless the board says otherwise, positions that are new, and we can debate what's meant by new, believe it or not, full-time, so that's omitting anything to do with part-time, and I do believe my predecessor, if he did add positions to the town, may have done so as part-time positions. And I think we can agree right now this evening that that section of the charter is silent on part-time. And then, of course, the question of compensation versus volunteer or grant or whatever the case may be. To me, when I read this as an outsider, if I can call myself that, and someone who is new to town, I took this as an affirmatory clause that reminds everybody that although administrative functions rest with the administrator, who is reporting to the Board of Selectmen as the executive, this was a reminder that no position goes forward unless it's funded, because that is the sole province of town meeting to fund. So I appreciate the discussion tonight, because as I said at the onset of it, I don't believe it's my place to interpret, and certainly not to interpret by myself. And I appreciate having the Bylaw Charter Review Committee, the board, learned folks from the community weighing in on it. I just don't know where we go from here.
Another
Because
night.
last but not least, if I could say, because I completely agree that it is about process and procedure, and that's why I referred to the position referenced therein, and which I possess right now, meaning it ain't got anything to do with me, for the most part. The practice at this town meeting, for what it's worth, your town administrator, me, did, at the onset of the discussion under Article 4, highlight all of the key areas in the line items. Something that we did during the deliberative process at the board, and something that I did without direction from the board, but agreement by the board, and that was to offer that information. So, I don't know where we go from tonight, but I appreciate the discussion. But as the board knows, I tell the team all the time that words matter, and I can interpret that string of words in probably 5 different ways, and certainly in ways that others wouldn't. So I think it's important, as we potentially walk away from this discussion tonight, to just affirm the fact that whatever may have happened in the past and what may ever happen in the future, this board and the town administrator acting through this board offered up ample information in a transparent manner at town meeting. Whether the process or the procedure required it, the people involved did that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to bring this back for board discussion, which obviously everybody's invited to, so that we can take an actual vote or set up a process.
We've beaten it to death.
I do, I agree.
Can we have heat at that point?
Yes. Anything else? General charter discussion, and I mean that by, what we haven't got into is any potential changes that we might have other than timeline for a May town meeting. Timeline, I think, is one that we could conquer this year and get that out of our way. Is there anything
That
else?
should be actually an easy one.
Yes. Is there anything else from your committee at this time, or could you come back to us with potential changes that you may have, and we can do the same at a future meeting?
I'd like to come back on this one.
We certainly will discuss this further and come back on it. Clearly there's a fair degree of disagreement on that particular one. There may be on others as well. But I think that probably most of what we would want to do in the short term is deal with the things that we're dealing with now. And then see what happens in getting the consultant and getting someone like that on board, because I think that would be hugely helpful, and I don't see a whole lot of point in getting too far into anything absent that person.
Yeah, I agree.
Other than something that may come up that we aren't thinking about right now.
Thank you. Anything else from Board of Selectmen? No. And I would just ask that in the near future, we're gonna have this topic, and any potential charter changes outside of the full review that you're interested in, bring them to that meeting.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you
Joe?
think it's been a,
Just that the committee needs to adjourn when you're done.
we need to adjourn, and before doing that, I will say this, I think has been a very productive meeting, and
Yeah.
hope
Yeah.
to look forward
Thank you
to some
guys for
more
coming.
in the future.
Thank you, Anita.
Meeting is adjourned.
Didn't hurt you anything.
Can I get a motion on the consent agenda?
I move that we accept the resignation from Ray Gottwald from the Bylaw Charter Review Committee with regrets, and that we vote to approve the following Board of Selectmen minute meetings, June 27th, 2022.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
New business, review and approve the Sustainable Fishery Management Plan for Herring River, herring harvest at Herring River. Brad? Wherever you're most comfortable.
Do you want to see the presentation, or would you just have a verbal?
About how long is the presentation?
It's 9 slides, 10 minutes or less.
Let's see the presentation.
Okay. then
And verbal at the same time.
I might stand up and vote here.
Okay.
And so I'm Brad Chase with the State Division of Marine Fisheries.
Brad, if you'd stand up if you're gonna stand up, or
Yes.
sit if you're gonna sit.
I think it's better if I address the presentation this way. So I'm Brad Chase with the State Division of Marine Fisheries, and I'm here with Heinz Proff with the Department of Natural Resources, here to present a joint plan to harvest river herring in the Herring River in Harwich. So a little bit of a shift from charter discussion to catching fish. So So it's a sustainable fishery management plan, which is now required by both the State Division of Marine Fisheries and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So it's a little bit of a process. These fish, as most of you know, they come up from the Nantucket Sound, up the Herring River, through the West Reservoir. They go into Hinckley's Pond, Seymour Pond, and Long Pond to spawn and have the young grow until they're ready to return to the ocean. They come back at about age 3 to spawn where they were born. So it's an interesting life history. Next slide, please. Okay, no problem. So there was a statewide ban for river herring in 2006, and that shut down all the harvests for all these different towns, where most towns had a town-wide open herring fishery, like the town of Harwich had. The town of Harwich was closed a year or two before the state, 2 years before the state closed, out of concerns for the population status of river herring. The state closed the rest of the river herring runs in 2006 because we had a drought around 2002 that caused declining populations throughout the state. So now to open, well, let me step back. So in the 1930s, the state had a Mass General Law, Chapter 130, Section 94, that allowed towns to petition the Division of Marine Fisheries to manage their own fishery. It's called local control. This has gone on for decades. The town of Harwich had this since at least the 1970s, and I think it worked very well. Before the state law, and for over 200 years, the town of Harwich managed their own river herring run, given its importance going back to the early years of the town of Harwich. So lots of importance. So until this new law, you had this partnership with the state and the town, where the town would petition the state would approve the plan, and the town would take over under local control. And then next slide, please. Enter the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. It's an interstate body that manages these migratory fish that cross state boundaries, like river herring do. So now there's a requirement that all states must monitor river herring runs. There's a requirement if you want to open a run, you have to base this on the best available science. And Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission closed all herring runs that didn't have these plans approved in 2012. So this is the process we now have to reopen. Next slide, please. So these plans, by definition, must not diminish potential future reproduction and recruitment of herring stocks. They must be sustainable, they must be conservative. They could be a statewide management unit, regional or river-specific. Almost all the ones that have been approved in recent years have been river-specific. So that's why we're here tonight talking about just the Herring River. The sustainability targets are typically fish passage counts, like we have in the Herring River, spawning stock biomass, mortality rates, or other biological metrics. What we're proposing here is a spawning run count that takes place at the West Reservoir every year. And the history is there were 5 plans approved in 2011. That's okay, we can move on to this. Okay. All right, the next bullet, please. Yep. So 5 plans were approved in the first round, 2011. Only one state plan has been approved for Massachusetts. That's the Nemasket River. It was approved in 2016. They're asking to renew their plan for this year. And if this is supported by the town, we would add the Harwich plan to the Nemasket River plan and present that to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. We've had 2 of the towns petition us, the town of Wareham and Pembroke. In both cases, the run counts really weren't strong enough for us to support moving those forward. So we've only had 4 towns petition us since the closure in 2006. The general trend has been the runs have improved since 2006. It's an impressive improvement until the last couple of years where things have dipped down again. But there was some nice improvements from 2007 to 2019. So here we have a picture of the herring run in West Reservoir about 100 years ago. And you can see a lot of barrels there where the herring were put in barrels, sent to Boston, and sold for bait for the tub trawl industry, for groundfish bait. It was a tremendous fishery. About 1 million fish or more could be harvested back in those days. So it has a lot of historic importance, cultural importance in town. It's supported by the different ponds that provide over 1,000 acres of spawning and nursery habitat. That's the 3rd most in Massachusetts, so it's an important run, and it has a lot of potential. Recent decades, very strong support by the Harwich Department of Natural Resources. And next slide, please, will show a picture of the spawning run count. It's an electronic counter through West Reservoir. My crew designed and installed it, and it's maintained cooperatively with the town of Harwich. And this would be the metric for which we decide how many fish we can take, the numbers counted there. Okay, next slide. So the sustainability measure would be, again, the ongoing spawning run count. And we'd look at 10% of the time series mean. And so what that's the average for the time series. You would allow taking 10% of that for your harvest. And there would be an action threshold at the 25th percentile, the time series count, which is the first quartile. It's basically a distribution of the lower counts. If you dip below that first quartile 2 years in a row, the harvest would be cut to 5% of the time series mean. If you dip below that count 3 years in a row, you'd shut down the harvest. And so that's something that we're proposing. Here's where the data is. It's a little bit messy, but basically you have, up at Hinckley's Pond, there's a count with volunteers run by the Harwich Conservation Trust that began in 2009. The electronic counter went in place in 2016. So you have 14 years of data. In the far right column, I have it adjusted for when you only had the Hinckley's count. And so using those data for those 14 years, the average or the mean is 573,000 fish. The 10% of that mean is 57,000 fish approximately, and the first quartile or the 25th percentile is 286,000 fish. So it's really a simple approach. You know, you're just taking a very small proportion of your average in the time series. And this is what many states do on the East Coast. What's different here is we're proposing to cap it at 10%. The state of Maine, for example, takes 25 to 60% of the fish coming up the river, and they've done it for many years, and it's actually sustainable. And the reason it is because these fish are very fecund. They have a large number of eggs that they carry, and so they're able to support large numbers of fish based on that high fecundity. So this is the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about. Next slide, please. And so before the harvest ban, the town of Harwich had 4 days, they opened a week, where they allowed harvest from March 1st to June 15th. They had a limit of 1,000 permits and different bag limits depending on the year. What we're proposing here is, once again, 10% of the time series mean, 57,000 fish. The math to allow this to happen is proposed here. If this is approved by the town at this level, it would go back to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. It would go to the technical committee to review it, then it would go to a management board to approve it. If it's approved, then it comes back to the town, and you can manage this harvest the way you want to. You just can't exceed that 57,000. And so this slide here shows at 600 permits, with a 5-week season, 20 fish per week per permit, you would catch approximately 57,000 fish if everyone caught their maximum. So this is what I'm proposing. Again, this would be approved for that maximum limit, come back to the town, and the town could decide to do what they want to, just not exceeding that 57,000. My recommendation in this case is the town seeks to get approval to do this and then decides how they want to manage it once they have that approval. For example, the towns of Middleborough and Lakeville, who run the Nemasket River count, they've received their approval. They've elected not to have a harvest. They're a little gun-shy about being the only town in Massachusetts with a harvest, so they wanted to have the approval. They haven't had a harvest yet. So the town of Harwich can make that decision. The timetable is that this would go to the board of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission in October, late October of this year, if the town wanted to advance it, and they would approve yes or no for the plan. And so this is the basic metrics. I hope you've seen the plan that we provided. And I can answer any questions you have on this at this time. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but the next slide just asks for questions or comments.
Thank you, Brad. Great presentation. Larry?
Thank you, Brad. I agree. Great presentation and great proposal. I was going to complain, however, that you didn't mention that Harwich closed our hearing run before the state did. We were smarter than the state, but until I got about 3/4 through the document where it does come up. So I always want to give Harwich credit. But
it was contentious because the state felt like it was their job to shut it down, and Harwich was proactive. Harwich said, okay, we're going to shut it down early, and the state was like, wait a minute, you can't do that. And then 2 years later, we shut it down for everybody. So it's kind of a credit to the town of Harwich, I think, in terms of natural resource management.
You mentioned the approval that one town decided not to move ahead. What's that mean to us? We could approve it one year and then approve it the next year for
Yes, you could.
time to time?
It's a 5-year renewal process with this interstate commission, and basically they're saying, okay, here's your cap, here's what you can catch. You can manage that the way you want to. For example, the town of Pembroke wanted to open, and we felt that their numbers weren't there, and now they're looking to open, special permission to have a one-day festival where they catch a few fish for people to use, and we'll probably approve that. So the town could have no harvest, or they could have a week-long. It's really up to the town once this plan is approved.
And how comfortable are you and Heinz in enforcing the 10%?
I'll speak briefly, then ask Heinz to speak. I think a key here is to have permits, where every person has a permit they must possess, and then on top of that, you have to have a trip ticket. With every time you harvest, the town would issue a unique trip ticket for that date, and those fish, what I'm proposing is that the fish would expire in 30 days, you have to use them, and that ticket would expire. So with the permit and the trip ticket, I think there's some pretty decent enforceability, and Heinz might have some thoughts on this as well.
Good evening. I'm Heinz Proft, Natural Resources Director of the town. And if this is the first and only time I'm up here, I'm going to summarize also that, it was back in 2004, and I was standing about 6 feet to my left, and along with Tom Leach, we approached the Board of Selectmen to talk about the possible moratorium or the closure of the run based upon what we'd been seeing. And we got support at the time from the Board of Selectmen to go and close our run down. And I had no idea it would take this long to come back in front of the board with the possibility of a potential harvest based upon what Brad just showed. What just went up in about 9 minutes has been about 2 years of back and forth discussions, edits, drafts. And as Natural Resource Director of the town, more than likely, if it got to that point where there was some sort of harvest schedule, it would come down my lane in terms of how are we going to enforce this as a town in general, and is it going to be under the Natural Resources Department as it was in the past with herring wardens, volunteer or paid, what time of schedule? Brad made a good point that in order to get that point or that topic brought forth, all this other work has to be done first. So I am in support of reviewing what we have. Because it's taken this long, it's almost as if we saw these numbers of 800,000, 1 million, 800, and we brought that discussion forth, and the fish somehow heard that, and we've gone to 800,000, 400,000, 292,000. So at any point, the brakes can be put on. But it's not a light switch where we would just suddenly decide to open the run. All this work has to be done ahead of time. I'm in support of it going forward, and in the future, if it came back with very few edits, the town could always be more restrictive than what was brought forth, hold back on opening of that, and all those other details of number of permits and how it's enforced can be literally pushed down the road for now, is what I'm thinking. Any questions?
Is that, Larry?
Oh, that's fine. Thank you, Heinz.
That would be monitored and suggestions to the board from you on a yearly basis.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Don?
Just a little history. Heinz, I was there on the board when that happened, and we were on the side of conservation then, and we made the right move. It was contentious. Sid Ziegler was the chair of the board at that point, and I remember the environmental police were threatened to come down here and use bolt cutters to get the fence open, and Sid threatened them that they were going to be arrested by the Harwich police if they tried. So we've had a history of being strongly in favor of the conservation of the runs long before anybody actually was worried about it.
Mary?
I'm all set. I thought that was a great presentation, and I even had to look a few words up in the dictionary, so that's always a highlight for an English major. I think your proposal's great. Get the okay to go ahead, and then you watch it and call it when you see fit.
Yeah.
Great plan.
Julie?
So I have to ask a basic question, because I'm not, I never fish. What is the benefit of doing this?
That's an excellent question and very appropriate. I think that river herring run harvest is a very traditional practice on Cape Cod, and I think what you see is people like to collect these fish to use for bait or to use to eat them. And so it's a practice that has faded away, I think, in recent times. And if you go back a few generations, it was really important. Lots of people use these fish. And so these fish provide great benefits for forage for all kinds of fish and wildlife. So they have great value just being in the river, not harvesting them. But I think it's just a really important cultural feature to this area, I believe. And there's a lot of folks that don't come to meetings, that don't really speak up. They can't afford boats, and so they shore fish. And shore fishermen have a shot at catching a keeper striped bass with live river herring, where otherwise it's hard to do. And then it's the folks that like to eat the roe, like to smoke the fish, like to brine them. Those fish I don't think are very well represented. And so I think it'd be nice to give that benefit to some of these folks, to have that access to these fish. So harvest is important. Forage is probably more important. So I think it's really essential to have a very conservative plan and not over-harvest.
Now, does the state help us with any of the issuing the permits, monitoring, or any of that? Is all to the town to do?
It's up to the town. You know, we manage the counter at the West Reservoir, and we'll stay doing that forever. And that'll be I think the backbone of the information as to how much you can catch. You know, every year it'll be adjusted. So I think what I'm proposing is to have a meeting every year with Heinz's department and just talk about things, talk about enforcement. So that technical assistance will be there every year, but the management of the permits and the compliance will be up to the town.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, great presentation. So it seems to be the consensus of the board to advance it.
Okay.
Anyone
Right.
have a problem with that? All set?
We don't
Okay.
need a vote.
Okay.
Do you want to?
I would recommend along the lines that the board approve the Sustainable Fishery Management Plan as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0.
All right, thank you very much.
Brad, thank you very much.
I will forward the plan to our director, and then he will move it on to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heinz. Can I get a motion on B?
Don't want to hear any presentation. I move that we approve the special permit for fireworks for the Harwich Chamber of Commerce event located at White House Field, September 17th, 2022, at 8 p.m. And I note that their regulatory compliances are all signed off on.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
None.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Motion on C.
I move that where are we here? I move that we approve the special permit for parade for Harwich Chamber, conducted by Harwich Chamber of Commerce. Parade route as presented in our packet for September 11th, 2022 at 11:30 a.m.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Cindy, do you want to make an announcement on that? Very exciting announcement.
It is a very exciting announcement. I look forward to this every year, coming in front of you all and getting the approval, but then also to make the community aware of who the Chamber has chosen as our Grand Marshal. This year, the theme is Remembrance, as it is September 11th. We do want to recognize that. And also celebrating our 7 villages, as I continue to remind everyone that we do have, our community is made up of 7 villages. We are thrilled this year to do something different. We are having 2 very special men in the parade as our Grand Marshals. They are brothers Chris and John Auer. It is always wonderful when we can honor people who have helped to make Harwich the community we are. And Chris and John do that as they continue to maintain the old-fashioned core values of integrity, hard work, and exceptional customer service that their father instilled in them, and that they continue along with the next generation at Robert B. Auer.
Thank you, Cindy. And I'm going to go for a round of applause on that.
Bobby would be proud.
Very. Thank you, Cindy. Can I have a motion on D?
Can I get clarification?
Yes.
The one-day wine and waltz, I see their application in here for one-day entertainment. Oh, the liquor license is here, okay. Never mind. Okay, I move that we approve the following Harwich Cranberry Festival requests for 100 Oak Street. Number one, one-day wine and malt special permit for September 17th from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. and September 18th from 2022 from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. 2, one-day entertainment special permit for September 17th, 2022 from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. and September 18th, 2022 from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. outside. Now, number 3, a craft fair special permit on September 17th, 2022 from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. and September 18th, 2022 from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
None.
I just want to say I appreciate the chair's movement of these things from the consent agenda down to new business. I really appreciate it.
Well, you asked long enough, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. E,
I move that we approve the following request for the Friends of the South Harwich Meeting House Incorporated. 1, a one-day wine and malt special permit, September 10th, 2022, from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. And 2, a special permit fee, I'm sure that somebody's going to say something about this, to be waived at $50.
Second.
moved and seconded. Any comments?
None.
My only comment is the fee waiver. There is a cost to the town to do this, and we continue to waive the fees, and I think that we should look at our waiver policy, but this is more often than not. And I'm not picking on this group, I say it about everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna vote for this tonight, but more than likely we'll start my no votes on the next request.
That's why I said something.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe?
Thank you.
And we are on to old business C. Dan and Russ. Vote to approve the Great Sand Lakes wastewater collection system design as the candidate project for use of the town's allocation of American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds in the amount of $616,255.31 and authorize GHD to submit the project application to Barnstable County ARPA portal. Welcome.
That wasn't a mouthful.
So that's what you want to do. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I guess building off of, some previous meetings we've had over the last several months, there was a outpouring of support at the public comment sessions during our CWMP revision, public seminars to address the Great Sand Lakes area, and to sewer and prevent further degradation of the ponds there. So we worked, I think, a couple months ago, again, back here to talk about CWMP, and we presented the concept of a comprehensive nutrient management plan to also incorporate addressing freshwater bodies within the CWMP revisions. With the availability of the ARPA money, we're now coming back to try to act on that. And I guess one thing that I'll just point out, at the One Cape Conference this past August 1st and 2nd, there was a big emphasis on addressing freshwater ponds. And one of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod just released a pond atlas of, highlighting 1,000 ponds on Cape Cod. And we're saying in their seminar that, not one community yet has implemented or adopted a freshwater component to their CWMP. And while I'd say we're still in process with revising the CWMP, I think this would be, a great step in that direction and would keep us really at the forefront of, I think, what's needed to make sure everything stays clean.
Thank you, Dan. Russ, anything to add?
Russ Kleekamp, engineer with GHD, just a couple other statements. This is, it seems to be a really good use of these funds. This is the last phase of sewering that will be allowed to connect to the town of Chatham. They already have their treatment infrastructure in place. Also, it's a nice use of the funds because the construction that's typically funded through SRF funding, which this likely would, the SRF funding does not pay for the engineering design. So that typically comes from a town funding source. But in this case, we can use this for the ARPA funds. So it takes out that town funded component, saves the town some money, accelerates the implementation of infrastructure around the pond. It's really I think the project really sells itself, really.
Thank you, Russ. Larry?
Thank you. Good proposal. I do have not concerns or reservations, I guess, but some qualms maybe. I'm trying to make this mild because it's hard to argue against this. But my My concern is, broadly speaking, is that in some ways these ARPA funds are a zero-sum game. You know, there's finite dollars. And we've, in the CWMP and our regulatory requirements are directed towards the embayments. So I think we want to be clear that this is outside of our CWMP in terms of regulatory and legal requirements. So my concern is, not that I'm going to argue going against it, is that do we take this, we remove this money, does that, I say zero-sum game, does that remove this potential funding to address our wastewater concerns, which we know have got us all scared with the new DEP draft? And so even though this should be done, I'm trying to weigh the priority. Are those same money, would it make more sense to use that to complete our CWMP? Am I making sense on this? Let's see.
Totally understand, and that's something that I wrestle with in my own head a lot, is, you know, how do we prioritize and judiciously use tax dollars, or, you know, or any available funds to address all the needs? Where I kind of, or where it stands in my view, I guess, is outside of Chatham and our availability of treatment there, we're several years away from, you know, if Harwich is fortunate enough to partner with Dennis, you know, in the construction of their plant, to have our wastewater treated there, you know, that's probably 5 years out, I would say, you know, from even sending flow to that plant. So I think absent doing this, there weren't really many other options for at least addressing wastewater with the current ARPA funds, because we don't have a place to treat it.
So
I see this as kind of an opportunity.
To conclude, your argument is it's not a zero-sum game. This money is available for this or not available at all?
Use it or lose it, it has a time frame.
Because there's a time frame going forward and we're not ready for it yet.
And this is only...
Because it should be clear that this doesn't help us with our wastewater plan.
Just one thing to add, though. I believe that this is 10 million out of 40 million.
Right.
So there's going to be future opportunities, and at those times, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of...
I thought the 10 million had already been spent. This is in fact the excess in addition to the...
This is the 10 million that was earmarked to each of the 15
So
communities.
the additional ones that's a future decision.
Yeah,
I misread that. I thought the 10 million had been allocated to the towns already.
The amounts that the county is giving, for example, Harwich gets 616,000, but it's up to the town to apply for.
And so we're going for that. That's part of the 10 million.
It's a good point to raise, because there are other uses for these ARPA funds. I believe it's broadband, COVID relief, and water sewer infrastructure. So this request would, for this first round of funding, encapsulate every bit, not one other penny left over to any other use, just so everybody's aware of it.
Right. I'm directing my comments toward the CWMP because that's such big money, and that removes that money from that.
3 years that this has to be spent, or 4 years it has to be spent, this first round?
I'm-
There was a presentation where they outlined that, and that was one of the key things, was the...
Well, I think you've answered my question. If we have to use it on something, this is our only choice.
2026.
In terms of wastewater.
Yeah.
Okay.
Calendar year 2026.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, and it really isn't zero-sum game, and it really is for CWMP. We're in the process of revising, and Great Sand Lakes is we would sewer it.
Right.
So all those homes would be picked up.
Right. But
And
that
we
may,
and we'll get our money's worth out of the contract that we signed with Chatham, that
Yeah,
we're
no,
never gonna hit the gallonage.
I hate to do this, Michael, but I need to correct you a little bit on that.
Please do.
And that the CWMP, if you look at Plan 208, was directed towards the saltwater embayments, removing nitrogen from there, not the phosphorus from ponds. And so when we do this, we're sewering, but it's a different problem. It's issuing the ponds rather than the embayments, was my point. So
But
it's
by
outside of the regulatory requirement.
But am I wrong, and outside of the protecting the phosphorus, by sewering the area and sending the sewer to Chatham, we are also going to be mitigating nitrogen.
And this was a component of Phase 8. The area that we're proposing, you know, the design funds for is that a section of Phase 8 of the 2016 CWMP. The Phase 8 that was originally documented had a little additional section up on the northern part of East Harwich, Standish Woods area, and then the Great Sand Lakes area was part of Phase 8. So this is closing that out. But yes, I understand your point is that the
Right.
regulatory requirement the
We're
TMDL's
directed towards
watershed
specific
permit.
watersheds, is
Right.
my point, so it's outside of that.
But the watershed, so we don't, it's not gonna benefit the watershed permit we have through the Pleasant Bay Alliance. I mean, there isn't anything on the table regulatorily speaking right now, though I could see it coming just like they did with nitrogen. But I think.
It's likely to come in the future. My point is that's outside of where we are now.
Thank you, Larry. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm coming from a little different direction than Larry, but he expects that. The CWMP was kind of a rigged game, I mean, in a certain way. They also kind of took out the priorities from the harbors because they were man-made, as if the fish would know the difference for nitrogen loading. The attempt at the Six Ponds District was all about trying to mitigate phosphorus and nitrogen runoff because there's an awful lot of activity that goes on underground. They're tied in, an awful lot of things are tied in together. And correct me if I'm wrong, because that was the study back then, is that a lot of our problems flow from north to south because of the contours. Eventually, it all winds up being a problem that's a common problem. I mean, we can choose to ignore that, but it's going to wind up being a problem in embayments somewhere, sometime, somehow. So I don't want to see freshwater bodies die out because we're so concentrated on what the plan said that we're ignoring the bigger picture, that we're the tutors, or the stewards of making sure that this place doesn't get messed up because of phosphorus and nitrogen loading everywhere.
And I guess just to add to that, one thing, and Russ can speak much more eloquently about the phosphorus and pond cycles, but when I had DEP on the phone about the new regulations and the nitrogen, I said, where is freshwater on this? And their statement was, we haven't made the link between septic systems and phosphorus to freshwater. Now, everyone that says that statement will also say that it's definitely a known and understood thing. There just hasn't been the legal pressure or 208 to make the regulators start to enforce it. So, like Harwich, I guess, did with the herring, I guess this is kind of analogous with addressing freshwater.
Nothing wrong with being first.
Mary?
No, I read your proposal, and we've talked before, and I say go for it.
Julie?
I don't have any issue with the proposal, but going back to Larry's points, where are we with the other sections that were previously on our schedule?
For phasing, for like phase 3 and
For what I remember as us really calling phase like 2B, because, it was too expensive to do 2, so we split it.
yeah, so 2B, meaning all the streets that were cut off, and as to, I guess, are you getting at what are the limits of what I will refer to as the new phase 3?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so.
I know we did WITA.
Yeah, Continental and WITA.
Continental and WITA,
And I have the original survey maps that went out for the phase 3 survey included areas from phase 2C that wasn't done, the original CWMP phase 3, and sections of phase 8. So right now, we are just getting the rest of that survey data in, and that's when we're really gonna be able to figure out where the streets cut off and who's, in and who's out. So we are hopefully in the next month or so gonna have that answer. We did submit the project evaluation forms to the SRF program. They were due the 12th, so about 10 days ago. So we have submitted for that, as well as the Route 28 sewer project. So everything's still in motion, but we're just in that data gathering portion as we to refine.
So is there any impact to those projects? Could there be any impact by using this money to do this, to do Sand Lakes versus using it on that?
I guess the only impact that I can draw right now would be, and I don't even know how it would work, but if the town wanted to use this $600,000 for a portion of the construction cost, that may be a possibility. But when we submitted the request for the article last year, we had a $30 million price tag. So, it's kind of small dollars in comparison to the bigger picture. I think,
No,
But
I
that
hear
could
you.
be a potential impact.
Okay, so we don't really know where we stand. When will you know roughly? I know you can't say
Yeah.
specifically, but,
I'm hoping in the next month or so, and I'll
okay.
keep pressing them to
okay.
get there.
No, thank
We're,
you. That's-
we're still working through some of the pump station siting too, so
Okay, yeah.
that also, if we move it from here to here, we may cut off a street
Right.
to pick up this one. So I'm cautious with saying how much we're gonna do,
Mhm.
so we don't find ourselves in a phase two situation.
Right.
So I wanna be real confident
And I
before.
appreciate that, and you're really good at that, so I'm just asking in terms of trying to understand, because I understand where Larry's going with the embayments versus the ponds. And I just wanna make sure that we get the biggest relief for our dollars.
And you're not the only one asking either. I hate not having an answer to that question right now. But we're working on it.
All right, thank you, Dan.
Joe, anything to add?
Well, first, it's comforting to hear the board's questions. As Dan and Russ can tell you, as we've been evaluating it at the staff level, we had a lot of those same questions at the time. So this sort of validates where we were at coming before you this evening. As Dan mentioned, we've got the special town meeting coming up in October. That's the next agenda item, or 2 from now. And we're already working on what we refer to as new Phase 3. And that's what I've heard you describe a moment ago to Member Kavanaugh, correct? So we're already working on that. So this effort really, I think, solves a couple situations. We're by no means the first town to be putting in for the county opera money. In fact, we're going to be in the last 5 or so, and I'm comfortable with that. We took our time, we evaluated it, and I do think this is an appropriate use, given the restrictions that the county has put on the ARPA funds. As you heard Russ say, it's not the full range of options that the town had with our direct ARPA funds that we did earlier this year. So with what the county has put around it, I think this is the best possible use for the funds, and I recommend it.
Thank you, Joe. Further from the board?
Nope, I'm fine.
Public comfortable with us going to a motion? The consensus seems to be that we want to move forward before anyone gets up to speak. Anyone want to make a motion?
It's for just Great Sand Lakes, then, right?
Yes.
I move that we support the expenditure of the ARPA funds in furtherance of sewering Great Sand Lakes.
And the second part of that would be to let GHD put in the ARPA portal request.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Go ahead.
Just because I know the county's gonna be looking for a copy of the minutes for this vote. The reference was made to expenditure. What we're looking for is authorization to apply.
That's what I said.
Very good, okay.
And that's what you'll write.
Will reflect the same.
And to allow.
And to allow GHD to enter that into the portal.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Discussion, changing charter, chapter 4, clause 4-4-1 and 4-4-2 pertaining to the Board of Selectmen affirming employee appointments. We've talked about this for the last couple meetings. After that last meeting, Joe did send out a memo on his thoughts, which reflect exactly what he thought before. Selectman Howell was gonna work on a potential policy, and if I heard you correctly at the beginning of this meeting, you have something to offer on this?
I do have something to float, and I really want to bring down the temperature because it has very little to do with the current town administrator. It has to do with my own feelings about my own responsibilities because it does allude to, in the charter, selections be made on the basis of merit only. I don't know how I can determine that without me knowing more, and I do know that without sharing this because I can't publicly share it. As late as 2018, when we did a department head selection, there were, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in the packet. Everybody was there with resumes, and as well as the person that was being recommended. I think that was when you were chair, Julie. And yeah, I'm not suggesting that we require, as a matter of fact, I don't want to require anything to be let go publicly, but I had taken a run, I know Larry's not big in favor of the language, but just something simple that in furtherance of its responsibilities under 4.4.4 of the charter, members of the select board may request any information they deem relevant to form a vote. Because I can't vote for the recommendation if I don't get this information, because I don't feel in my heart that I have sufficient information to be able to form a vote to assure myself relative to all the candidates that this is the one that we want to appoint for the town. In practice, never have voted against any of the recommendations, but I just feel like this is something that I need to have, and I don't want to vote just on form. I'd rather vote on being informed. So I thought that this would be something that we could support, because if you don't want the information, you don't have to ask for the information. And it's not going to be codified, and it's certainly not something to be published. But in my experience, it has been provided, like I said, right up to just about to the end of Chris Clark's tenure, and nobody has ever revealed anybody's name or who got what as opposed to whom. It was just used as information for the select board members to know how they wanted to vote.
I like your solution. Mary?
I just wanted you to clarify that, Don. Are you suggesting, you're not suggesting that it be in the packet, but that if one of us or all of us wanted information, we'd ask
You could go
for
and
it and
seek
get
it
it?
out.
Or go up and see it?
Yeah.
I'm okay
And then it
with
would be
that.
made available
That's-
upon request to us.
I think if you did that today, you would find them open to that.
Well, we might not need the policy then. But I'm just,
But-
I'm just suggesting
Yeah.
something that would be universal, that's not judgmental to anybody.
Well, I think it clarifies it and it gives the town administrator direction. So I certainly appreciate that. Julie?
So I guess the only thing I want to clarify is when you say whatever information you want, so to what extent? Because, I mean, we want to be careful, right? You know, what other kind of, are you talking about only the information that will be part of the application? Because then I think there's probably a little bit of information, social security numbers and things that you shouldn't be able to have access to.
I'm not suggesting that he create any information. I'm just saying that I've got the resumes of everybody in that particular selection process.
You're just talking resumes and things like that?
That's it.
Okay.
Because
so
that's their
nothing
qualifications.
else, no other, when you said any info, I just wanted to.
I was trying to be coy about the language so that it didn't wind up piquing Mr. Galvin's interest here about, okay, what is it you got your hands on? It's just any information that can help you form the vote. That's if you want to say any available information, because they have to submit things.
Right, that's all, that's what I was looking for,
I don't want
clarification.
anything to be
Stuff that
created.
would have already been submitted as part of the
Nothing to be created, and we can't vote on this anyway, because we have a policy, 4 policies where there's a second reading, so, but if that's something that you're interested in, I could put it in writing and we could vote that.
And the only other point I'm making is that, you know, we're looking for applicants, so we don't want to be seen as having info loose that somebody who's applying may feel uncomfortable with would be my thing, you know. No, I don't think anybody on this board would want to apply for a job and wonder how much of my information is floating around in a vote, right? That's all I'm saying.
That's not why I'm not sharing this. I have it printed out, but I will say that I have never served with a select person who wasn't an adult.
Right.
And no one has ever gone around to the supermarket. Well, Bill may have some skeletons for me, but the bottom line here is, though, I don't know anybody who's ever spoken out of class and said, you have no idea that Bill didn't get that job, but he put in for it. That's never happened.
Agreed.
Larry?
I'm okay with it.
Joe? Don, say it again.
Yeah. Well, I did write it down.
Condense it a little, though.
No, it's just one sentence. In furtherance of its responsibilities under 4.4.1 of the Charter, members of the Select Board may request any available information they deem relevant to form a vote. That's it.
Joe? What do you think?
Thank you. No objection whatsoever. I think the disconnect was on the distribution method. And so what I heard was request. I don't think a request is necessary. It's always available. But what I didn't hear was inclusion in the packet or posted somewhere, because that brings it to a different level. So the distribution mechanism that I heard in that is fine.
And you're comfortable with that?
Yes, absolutely.
And I might add, I spoke to the town administrator so that I would wind up having that in there. It was part of our discussion.
And do you want that as part of a policy, or do you just, now there's a clear direction of what the board wants?
The latter. I think we're at a point where we all understand each other, and more importantly, I can prep the assistant town administrator to have materials available and convey that to you folks so that you have ready access to whatever you're looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then looking forward to other boards, is there any need for a charter change on this, or are we gonna let other boards interpret it differently?
I will say that you be careful, because even when you're talking to other boards, just because you're talking to a select person doesn't mean they're talking to the same type of setup in government, because there's a large number of people around here who are formed by the town manager system. That would require us to make a change in government, which is a very cumbersome process. It's not as simple as just changing a few words in the charter. If we can agree that we'll all act civilly and just ask for the information we want, then we don't need to have any conversation about that.
We're all comfortable with that?
I am. In fact, I'm very appreciative. I thought it was clear enough the way it is, so.
Okay, vote to postpone and reschedule 2022 special town meeting to October 24th, 2022. Joe, do you want to tell us how we got here and the challenges that you're facing and all the conversations you've had with all of the different elected people that you speak to about this?
Certainly. If I could, by way of introduction to that, tell you that the date is changing yet again. October 24th was the latest date that we could get to that comported with the moderator's schedule. In a moment, I'm going to recommend a date that I think is more conducive to our elected officials and the process, and gets everything done based on certain assumptions. But if you see in my memorandum, going to a date earlier than the 24th of October would still allow us to hit the key dates that you can see in the memorandum. Really what we're dealing with at this point, and the necessity of changing it from September to October, you heard earlier this evening from our finance director, town accountant. She is feverishly working on closing the books for fiscal year '22, and that culminates with the visit of the auditors this week, which is standard operating procedure. The hope and expectation is that once that arduous process is done, we all, finance director, administrator, and board, then to those groups, to the finance committee, will have a clearer understanding of what's available for funding sources. So we're not looking to change the scope of the warrant. We're not looking to expand anything, but we're just trying to ensure that from the finance director to me to you folks, we have the best information available, and we won't have that until we close the books. So then the date in question that I would recommend based on moderator and clerk availability would be Tuesday, October 18th. Again, still be 6 p.m. and would still be at the community center. I recognize that the specificity of notice doesn't allow you to confirm that tonight, but you could do that at your meeting on the 6th of September. I think it's more important to just start confirming that new date, and that date does comport with the key elected officials that I mentioned.
Thank you. Questions from the board, Larry?
None.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be really clear, because there's a lot of elected officials, I was concerned rolling into the meeting about Emily. It's a brand-new town clerk, only been in office for a few months. 2 days into the proposed date here, we were going to hold a special town meeting, but she was also going to have to be responsible for early town voting 2 days prior to that. I'm not sure that there's enough hairs in my head to tear out to do all of that at the same time. So
There's not.
She's okay.
Definitely not.
It has happened once before. So Emily's fine with this too, then? She can pull this off with the available resources that she's got?
October 18th is the clerk's preferred date with everything else she has on her docket.
Terrific. That's all I need to know.
So the rest of, Julie?
I'm fine with that.
Mary?
I'm fine.
Okay. So just for, we'll take that to an official vote because of the way this is noticed at our next meeting. But this is confirmed unofficially tonight. Is that good, Joe?
Yes, very much, thank you.
A motion on the contracts.
Oh, my. I move that we award a contract to Ballard Mack for the purchase of a Mack tractor in the amount of $168,652.50.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0.
And let's see here. I'm not sure, where are we then?
Vote to
Ballard Mack.
approve the agreement with GHD for effluent recharge site investigation in the amount of $60,000.
That was my motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0.
I can do a move to vote approve amendment number 3, a no-cost contract extension between the town of Harwich and CDM Smith for the Cold Brook nitrogen attenuation project.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Don. Moved by Larry, seconded by Don. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Town Administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. A few more contracts to bring to your attention. The first two relate specifically to our last town meeting, so I'm just pointing out the great news that we remain on track for ongoing procurements. First one related to Article 26 at the 2022 annual town meeting, and as you may recall, it is the acquisition of a dump body for a dump truck at the DPW department. The appropriated amount came in at $48,450. The actual cost, because of spikes and all of that, come to $53,790. We do have that in the overall line item because we anticipated savings in other areas, and so I've executed that contract, and that is through the Greater Boston Police Council, known as GBPC on the state contract. And you'll see in the packet that you have all the standard materials for that, including the pre-procurement, post-procurement, and the actual agreement itself. The next item, similar, is Article 15 of our last annual town meeting, and it relates to equipment for Channel 18. And so what you'll see in the article calls for equipment related to Channel 18 upgrades in various areas. And so a contract in the, or excuse me, a bid in the amount of, give me a moment, I apologize. I think the first was $47,083.16, and that's for Channel 18 studio broadcast equipment. And I think that covers it for right now, so there's more to come. And this was awarded to, I think I could read my own paperwork. Unique Media Systems, which is a subsidiary of Unique Scientific. And again, in your packet, you'll see the pre and post procurements and the relevant agreement documents. And then last but not least, the town renewed with HubTech as anticipated. You may recall that HubTech it continues to be our vendor relative to server network managing and monitoring, critical components that are above and beyond what the county is going to be providing or has been providing. And that contract was in the amount of $59,967.36. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Selectmen's report, Larry?
None.
Don?
Went out, as I told Mary, went out to see the progress at Murray Lane in West Harwich. It's something to see. I mean, they're high-quality houses, and there are people that have been waiting for this for a long time, and it's going to be added to our inventory. And I made a comment at the trust that Mr. McCaskill would probably appreciate, too. The people who are living there will eventually wind up moving after their families grow up and everything. These will never be Airbnbs. They are always going to wind up being part of the structure of our community and the fabric of our community.
That's great. Mary?
Nothing for me, but just a question for Joe about that Channel 18 one. Did I read that we're buying some equipment for $66K, but selling some for $47? Did I read that right? It looked like we were selling some to, looked like a good deal.
Well, as Joe finds that, Julie, anything on selectmen's report?
Thank you.
You know what? You can tell me
That's all
that
right,
later.
he's looking, he's almost there, he's to the bottom of his pile.
I don't really have
Exactly.
anything
Too many
except to
contracts.
remind people that there really is an irrigation ban. So, remind them.
Only if you're on town water.
Doesn't make any sense.
I don't like that part of it.
Mary, anything for selectmen's report
No,
other than that?
nothing, no.
And I have nothing either.
You can close. We can talk about that later, Joe. That's
Thank you.
fine.
There's too many elements for me to.
Can you bring that back to our next meeting, but let Selectman Anderson know tomorrow if you find that?
Doesn't know good.
Thank
They
you.
put a sign out.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0.
Dang, it was 5 minutes off.
Yeah, put some money behind that, Mike.
If Joe,
I would have won.
if Joe found
See
the
the
answer
packet?
quicker, you would've won.
So it's the
I
date
just
and
did that to mess you up.
919.
correct.
Mary bet,
Exactly.
weird, Mary
Yep.
bet 820.
Supposed to have 35 days separation.
All right.
Good thing I'm around.
Well, yes. Let me get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been hurting cats. Let me get back
I'll
to you.
call you, because I'm gonna try and do some sort of housing trust update. I know that Judith's been.
I thought it was
Yes, I
45 days from when.
had some conversations, and I'm working on that.
Back to my old days.
No, I think that's a good idea.
If anyone
Part of
listens.
the provision of the state law,
Selective.
delve into administration
Where'd you get that
factor,
nice book?
the changing
Our
from
town administrator gave it to me. You didn't get one?
I did not get a code book.
changing the executive order.
Did you ask? Because I can't remember who I stole that one from.
Sure, I would love one of those. No, I'm not.
No, you're there.
And you touched on two that I'm interested in at least talking about.
Well, I mean, look at the
Serial numbers.
I will.
because I've been on this roll since back to 1985.
Oh, is that the
Board members.
No, I'm definitely interested in a couple as
Get up
this town continues to
I
grow.
did not know that.
We should at least
Yeah.
Yeah,
So when
That's exactly what I said, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
The board members.
Exactly what I said.